So ladies and gentlemen, please cooperate and be seated. We already have with us Mr. Sheriff Mojaber, who is the speaker of this session. And moderating this session is Mr. Rajan Sharma, Director of Interads Exhibitions Private Limited. Mr. Sheriff carries with him great eminence and experience. He is the president of Creative Expos and Conferences and member of International Association of Exhibitions and Events. In 1981, Sheriff joined Carnes Expo Group, now known as Reed Exhibitions and Anglo-Dutch Company. And during his 10 years at CEG, he managed and launched several shows serving diverse industries such as aerospace, healthcare, communications, electronics, and information technology. In 1989, he joined International Data Group as president and CEO of its World Expo Corporation. And during his 4 years, which included 2 years in Paris, WC grew from 4 shows in 2 countries to 46 shows in 18 countries, a remarkable achievement. In 1993, Sheriff founded Creative Expos and Conferences. CEC has organized its events in US and abroad. Sheriff is also a member of Board of Directors of the Society of Independent Show Organizers, CISO, and the chairman of its International Committee. He's a recipient of several trade show industry awards of distinction, including the first ever prestigious IEIA International Excellence Award in 2014. He's definitely a frequent speaker in the trade show forums, domestically and internationally, and it's a great honor to have him here for this session as the speaker. Let me also take this opportunity to introduce to you all the moderator of this session, Mr. Rajan Sharma. He's the director of Interads Exhibition Private Limited, Conferences and Exhibitions. Interads Exhibitions Private Limited is one of the leading exhibitions and conferences organizing company in India. He has also been involved in the advertising field for more than 20 years. He's associated with various industry associations. Interads Group today has a team of experienced professionals. Interads organizes various international exhibitions in partnership with leading exhibitions organizers in the world. Besides exhibition business, Interads has a vested interest in education business and advertising business since 1960. So may I now request Mr. Rajan Sharma to take over and moderate this session. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry we had to pull you out of your tea and coffee break. I'm very pleased to moderate a session with my very old friend, my buddy of 20 years, Sheriff. Sheriff and me go a long, long way back. His body of work is bigger than the body that he has. And Sheriff is truly a global trade show man. He is one of the most recognized personalities in the world in trade show business. The key to success is that he has lived in Asia, worked in Asia, now lives in States. But his understanding of various regions, whether it's Asia, America, Europe, is tremendous. And that's what makes him very successful at the job that he does, which is making people, growing people's businesses. And a very successful man, a very well-known man. And he has a fantastic presentation. I call it a wacky Yankee presentation, which he's got for you guys today. feel free to ask him, rip him apart about that after the presentation. He's prepared for that. Sheriff, the floor is yours.
1, 2, 1, 2. Can you hear me over there? Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. Thank you, IEIA, for allowing me to present in front of this great, impressive group. I also want to congratulate IEIA for the work that they've done in the past 3 years and really burst into the scene all over the world, including the United States. So what I'd like to do today is have a 3-part presentation, if you will. The good part is going to be what I present. The better part is going to be the questions that my moderator is going to ask. And the absolute best part is going to be the one that you're going to be asking me, and hopefully I'll be able to respond. So what I'd like to do is not do it a little bit less conventional than usual and walk a little bit around. I'll be asking some questions, so please listen. And I'm going to try to have it more as a participation type session rather than somebody who comes and tells you and pontificate, which I have nothing to teach, I have nothing to learn. Sorry, I have a lot to learn, and I'm looking forward to it. So I will start my presentation. Great, it's on the board. So I'm going to structure my presentation in 2 ways. One, I'll speak briefly about what happened 30 years ago, what was that famous year of 1985, and what we are today. And the second part is going to be how to move forward, specifically in Indo-American relations. So before I do that, perhaps I can give you a very quick background. We're trying to get the, voila. Okay, so I was in the business of trade shows 40 years ago. I started, like I think all of us, by pure luck, just getting into a business that probably all our relatives don't know what we do. And I had a tough time explaining what I was doing to my family, like I'm sure a lot of you still have a problem. I was the VP of Asia Pacific for 10 years, from 1980 to 1990, or 89 to be more precise. And my last position was the VP of Asia Pacific for Reed, and I was based in Singapore, and we had several shows in the region, 42 to be precise, including some big shows such as the Asian Aerospace Show. But what's important in that part is that this is the first time that I encountered India, and I came to India in 1985 in order to prepare 2 shows. Those 2 shows were very interesting because one of them was a show called NEPCON, Inter-NEPCON, which is basically electronic component manufacturing, because we did believe that India was getting into that phase and was going to be a global player in this field. The second show wanted to do was a telecommunication show. Obviously, a major infrastructure. We all know, obviously, the evolution of the trade show and the telecommunication industry parallel, and the importance of such communications in any industry. In 1993, I started a company called Creative Expos and Conferences, and I specialize in helping companies, mainly in the US, but not just in the US, bring their show from America to the United States. And I can tell you right now, I am sure I will receive quite a few questions on the topic, so I'm not going to answer what I know is a question to come, why the Americans are not here in bigger numbers. So hold that thought, hold that question for probably 20 minutes or so. But basically, we also help US and other shows bring foreign exhibitors and visitors. So my first question is from the audience here, who is involved in bringing pavilions of Indian companies overseas, outside India? Please raise your hand if there are any. Who brings Indian companies? I see a couple here. Indian companies, 3, 4. Okay. You know, the secretary talked about the fact that, you know, the Indian industry is growing, and it's the beginning of probably a fantastic expansion in the next years. I truly believe that. I think the first manifestation is in taking companies outside of India. If you look at a little parallel, and I know you've heard that before, the China economy and the China exhibition industry and India, today, all the major shows in the United States have a big contingent of Chinese exhibitors. Any show that you go to has a lot of Chinese exhibitors. By doing so, they make the Americans, in this case, curious about going and taking their show to India, to China. In the past couple of years, we start seeing Indian exhibitors becoming much more active, much more export-oriented, and it comes into some of those industries that are where you play a very strong role. For instance, food. You know, a company or an association like APIDA, of course the TFAI, or I shouldn't say TFAI, what's the new name? ITPO. ITPO has been very active. In a food show, for instance, in the United States, you'll get 30, 40 companies. If you go to a show in Dubai for the Gulf Food Show, you have close to 200 and 300 companies that go. And by the way, we're lucky to have one of the ladies here who's responsible for bringing those companies all the way. Please raise your hand and be recognized. Thank you. She has brought 200 to 300 companies to Dubai, which is unbelievable. And we hope and we think that's going to be a trend. There will be more and more Indian companies going overseas. That, in turn, will make India interesting for a lot of the American and European, although the Europeans are a long head start on the Americans, but it will make the American companies interested more and more in India. If so many come to our market, maybe we should go to their market as well. How many of you, by the way, on the audience are show organizers? Please raise your hand. Thank you, thank you. A good majority, that's wonderful. Thank you. How many are suppliers to the industry? I imagine the rest. Right? Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you. Everybody has a very important role to play in this ecosystem of trade shows. How about venues? How many venues do we have here? All right, I see the main venues. Excellent, from all over India. That's fantastic. Obviously, venues, like the minister said, or the secretary said, very important part in the evolution of the industry, and everybody's watching what's going to happen to the venues. And if what the gentleman has predicted, 20 venues in 20 years, I can only say that the future is rosy, is fantastic, and it's going to be wonderful for everybody, Indian industry and international industry coming in. So enough about my background. And let's talk a little bit about, like we said, 30 years ago. What happened 30 years ago? How many holes 30 years ago, 1985? Anybody would like to answer? How many holes there was in India? All of India? One. Exactly, one. Pragati Maidan. Today, Pragati Maidan is still here. Is there anybody from Pragati Maidan, by the way, before I say anything? That's fantastic. Welcome. We're very happy you're here. When I came first in 1985, obviously Pragati Maidan was the only place to go. And we wanted to do a telecom show. And we did a telecom show, I think, in Hall 8 or something, the one that has the air conditioning here. That was very good. That was great. Obviously, at the time, you know, our expectations were high. Today, our expectations are even higher. So we understand that there will be a renovation. There will be a lot of good things coming up to TFAI, to Pragati Maidan. We just welcome that, and with open arms. I think it's very needed, and it's going to play a very important role. Unfortunately, whoever remembers who ran Pragati Maidan in 1985? Please, Pragati Maidan people, don't answer that. Let's see who does. Who ran Pragati Maidan in 1985? Okay, I see a gentleman there. Yes, sir? Yes, you. That's right, Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus was the all-powerful gentleman who was very powerful, let's put it this way. And for some reason, we could not get our tenancy to repeat our show in Pragati Maidan. I say this for a reason. is because, obviously, with outside the organizer looking in, you want to be able to have a predictability, if you will. You want to be able to know that if you do a show, you're going to be able to repeat it. I think it goes true for all of you. If you do a show in a venue, you want to be able to do it again. And sometimes there are other motives than pure economical that get in the way, which is something we all have to contend with. And unfortunately, we can't do that. So the only way we could do the show, the second show we wanted to do, was at the Arc Hotel. And those of you who know, obviously not the ideal situation, but feasible, had a reasonable show. Everything was fine. That was in 1985. What was the biggest show in 1985, by the way? Who knows what was the biggest show? Yes, ma'am? IATF, right. Absolutely. Great show, but more B2C. So what was the big B2B show? Anybody? Who's the conscience of the industry? Who is the repository of all the information on the industry? I should maybe back up and say, how many of you were in business 10 years ago? 10 years ago, in this business? A lot of you. All of you were 10 years ago, right? How many were 20 years ago in this business? All right, key question. Who was in business, in this business, in 1985 of the audience? You were? You were? Well, we applaud you because you're the pioneers, and because of you, we're here today. Thank you. Well, that no wonder you have the answer to those questions, of course. So B2B was just nascent. There was almost none. We were all trying to figure out what's the best way. The way to promote the show was very difficult. We could not, like in the West, try to get lists of people that were very specialized, let's say in construction or medical or what have you, whatever industry you were in. So we were forced to get into the newspaper, take the business section, and promote the show, which is not the ideal way to do business, obviously. And things have become much more sophisticated, but still a little bit of that today. So hopefully, in the next few years, that's going to change a little bit. So perhaps what we can do, because of time, I was told to move on as far as the 30 years, and we can talk about moving forward. What I'd like to do now is tell you a little bit about the US market. The reason I think it's important to talk about that is because a lot of you will be wanting at some point to tie up with US companies in order to do launch shows here in the market. And I'm going to go very quickly, explain to you what the US market is, that you can perhaps be helped by this information when you go after some brands that you'd like to bring into the United States. As you will very well know, the British have been the first to come into this market and throughout Asia. They've been the pioneers in our business. Companies like Montgomery were the first before even our German friends would come in, before all the other UK companies came. And there was really almost no American company except a company called Connor's Exposition Group, which was today known as Reed Exhibitions, which at the time was very, and it still is very present in Asia. But again, they were the only exception, if you will. So the US market, to give you some broad perspective, is about 9,000 shows. You have today the representative of the two main associations sitting over there, Mr. Dubois and Mr. Schomer, who represent the whole industry in the United States. There's a particularity in the United States, the fact that we like to look at ourselves as almost two different industries. One is for the for-profit shows, and the other one is the association shows. I realize you have a good portion of associations running their own shows in India as well. Same thing in the US. The US roughly has 60% of the market represented by individual association. And 40% are represented by for-profit association, for-profit organization. That means private companies. Of this, the name that you all know, UBM, Reed Exhibition, Nuremberg Messe, since I'm here in front of their table, I've got to mention them. And, and then, you know, obviously companies that have been active. But the important thing is that there is right now a trend of the disappearance of the big, major US multi-show companies. Connor's Exhibition Group, which was the biggest, has been bought, has become Reed Exhibition. That's a British company. UBM bought a huge chunk of a company called Miller Freeman, has become UBM. Just recently, this year, two of the big US companies, one called Advent-Star, was bought by UBM. Another company called Hanley Wood in the construction field was bought by Informa, yet another British company. So in other words, the British really have taken a very wise, smart, and calculated decision to buy the big US companies. That's one of the reasons why you're not going to find them here, because they're British. You will find the British, but some of them originally were US. Example in case, we said that 3 months ago UBM bought, and thank you, by the way, Mr. Mike, for buying our US companies. He's been very active, by the way. Please recognize Mr. Michael Duck sitting here in the audience. So we're trying to find a little bit the remaining companies. There are two or three of them in the US that are of any significance. Krauss, E.J. Krauss, tried their hand here. Did not really work out. Diversified, tried their hand here. Did not really work out too much. There might be another one or two that are trying. So already you have, you know, a lot of strikes against the US industry. On the other hand, British, German industry, very successful. So why is that? Well, if we analyze again the industry from for-profit versus association, the for-profits are not, today are almost non-existent because of the reasons I gave. That leaves obviously just the association market. So for those of you who are interested in going into the US market, you got to know what the association market does. And as we said, it's 9,000 events. They represent 60% of it. Again, to catch up a little bit on some of the shows, some of the organizers, the disappearance of the large ones. The association market, the majority own one show. So they have one brand. That's all they look at. They are obviously representing it through all its forms, publication, market research, trade shows. And most of those associations have their mission to develop the US market as opposed to go worldwide. They do not have a motive and sometimes do not have the mandate to go outside the US to any other markets. So that restricts that 6,000 shows that we were talking about, which represent 60% of the market, really is perhaps a few hundred associations at diverse state of development, and the majority are very reluctant to go outside the US. The board of directors of those associations is usually inward-looking. Most of the members don't know the international. You know, there's a joke, I don't know how accurate it is, that in America, only 22% of the market, of the people, have a passport, which means it's a very restricted market. Very few people are in contact with international people. So that puts obviously a big barrier for Americans looking at the outside. Also, the US market is so huge that it does not really, in a way, I agree with that, does not in a way, is not conducive to go out. But there are exceptions. Here are some of the exceptions. These are associations that have been very successful, have come maybe some of them 10 years ago, sometimes more. IAPA is the Amusement Park Association. They do a show throughout Asia. They move from show to show, from city to city. So they're very successful. The same thing for NBAA, which is the National Business Aircraft Association. They have a show in Switzerland, they show in Hong Kong, although that moved a little bit, and a show in America, in Brazil. So that makes them a very international association. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have passed by that. I can't even hear myself now, but that's okay. AEM, which is the construction industry, and basically in cahoot with the Munich Fair, they do all the construction shows, including, I believe, here in China. Chapter has been a very successful product, and it's throughout Asia with show in China, show in Taiwan, in Korea, in Malaysia, in Singapore, and they came here to India, and I believe at some point they will re-enter the market as well. So all those things obviously are against associations and for-profit going outside the US, where all those obstacles are not existent for the UK and German industry. So what are the main ways that they want to do business? When you're a US company and you look at the international, you have three ways of doing business. You can go it alone. Some of those associations that I mentioned earlier have done it. In other words, you send your staff, you find a PCO in this case, and do it yourself. And by the way, I want to commend one of the PCOs that you have here, world class. When the STEMI Association came 5 years ago, they looked around to find the best PCO in India, and they found it in the presence. Where are you? Please stand up and be recognized. This lovely lady here, Moni Sarkar from KW, did a fantastic job for the SEMI Association, and they're coming back, and they certainly will use her services again. On the other hand, another show that I brought into India did not want to go it alone. They did not have the expertise. They felt that, India, I don't know, when I talked to the CEO, sounds very interesting, but we have no knowledge on what to do, what to expect. We don't even know how to get speakers from India. We don't know what associations are important. So the answer was, of course, don't do it alone. There's no way you're going to learn all this very quickly. There are people sitting in this room that have done it for 20, 30 years. Use their experience. That brings us to the second part, the third part, I would say, which is the joint venture model, which is the preferred way. In this very case, the show was the World of Concrete, and the joint venture partner was no other than my moderator, Mr. Rajan Sharma. Where are you, sir? Please, thank you. And the deal was done in less than a month. And it was simple. Our strength, the US, we can bring international exhibitors. We can bring the knowledge of the industry. We have the brand. We can certainly help on the conference program. And you, joint venture partner, Mr. Sharma, you can bring the local speakers. You can sell the industry in India and maybe surrounding areas. You can do the logistics as well. And we can do an equal joint venture. That worked perfectly on most of those accounts. And finally, the third way to approach, which is more in line with an American industry which is unsure of itself when it comes to outside the US, is not ready to do it on their own, is really not even ready to do it in a joint venture because that presupposes a good amount of risk, and they go through the licensing approach, which is the second point of the slide in front of you. The licensing approach is very simple, and it is basically, I lend you the name of my exhibition, which is successful overseas. and you do almost everything else, and you give me a small percentage of the top, sometimes of the bottom, but to be negotiated, basically. And so perhaps what I can do to try to finish my part of the presentation is to go a little bit further into those three strategies. The first one, go it alone. The risk is moderate. You go it alone, so you know what you're going for. You have the people who supposedly know the industry. And so it is basically a total control that you have and a moderate risk that you're taking. The licensing approach, I'm a board of director of an association. I don't want to take any risk. I have no appetite for this. If I take a risk, my whole career and job could be in jeopardy. I don't want to do that. I'll go through that. The risk is low because I'm not taking any financial risk. And my control is low as well, obviously. So I don't have the day-to-day, control of the quality of the event and so forth. So the quality of the person you're licensing to or the organization you're licensing to is crucial. Because if they're a good outfit, they're going to do a bang-up job. That's great. If they're not, then you're in trouble. So that's the loss of control. And the last one, which is the joint venture, it's shared. The risks are shared. The control is shared. Everything is shared, which is equal, which is the preferred way for the long run, obviously. So to finish, I'll just speak a little bit about what an international company looks into an Indian company before they do a joint venture. The very first thing they want is transparency. Got to be able to know exactly, even basics like who really owns the company. That is absolutely crucial. What are the financials of the company, including all the fringes? Is it financially sound? Obviously, you don't want to get in a joint venture partnership if the company you're with is not financially sound. You also want them to have a culture of sales. Obviously, that's going to drive everything. So you want to make sure that they sell. It's not an order taken. It's not a company that happens to be in a good position and receives the order but don't aggressively go sell. And they got to have the customer service orientation. Now that's one plus for India because I've seen the people talking and going to sell, and the customer service is usually very good. And so certainly better than some countries outside of India. And the knowledge of the industry, that's a must, obviously, to be able to tie up with you. So these are really some very basic tips that I would like to give you. I'll be more than happy. This was my little presentation, which is the good part. But the better part is what my moderator is going to ask. And as I said before, the best part will be when you start asking questions, and I'm sure you have some of those. So, Mr. Moderator, shall we go and sit? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. That was a nice presentation. I know you mentioned something about the U.S. Companies a bit reluctant to move out due to the reasons that 60% of them are controlled by the associations and 40% are private, but our friends from UK, Mike, you've been eating these guys all over the place. So they've been buying you guys out. But I have a question to ask you, and I'm sure loads of people are going to ask you this. Normally an association wants to serve the members by serving them, by taking them to countries where the economy is doing well. And if I'm not wrong, even in China, which you mentioned, you have shows which have been taken down there. And in India, we are definitely projected to have a very bright future. Your own president has come here the second time in his tenure. And the media is going on about the fact that we have good days coming ahead. So wouldn't the association want to serve the members by taking the brands out? I'm like, it's not the question that they will say, we want to live in the frog in the well story. Just because the economy of a country is doing well, why wouldn't they like to come out, whether to India or to Europe for the matter?
Well, first of all, it's a great question, of course, and the question of the U.S. industry going out is being debated every day. We got our two great representatives who are always trying to encourage, American companies, U.S. companies going out. But all the things that I just mentioned here, come to play in a very powerful way. The market is huge. The market is enormous, and it's homogeneous. Unlike a UK company or even a German company that as soon as they have a product, they look at the border, at the next country, next border, trying to see how am I going to export my product or my exhibition outside my country. In the US, that question comes maybe way down the road after you've exhausted all the possibility of your home market. So, and that translates into the general exports. If you look at the exports of the US, I mean, you have a handful of companies that are really international, the Boeings of this world,
right,
and the GEs and so forth, now the IT companies and so forth, but the bulk, the middle size and so forth are almost, are very weak as far as export. So it's not an across the board like Germany has, the mid-size, the family-owned companies that are also the engine of the export. So that's one. Two, coupled with the fact that there's less and less decision-making in the US if they've been bought. The big ones have been bought by the UK. So if you want to talk to Reed, UBM, and all those companies, you got to do it either in Asia or in the UK. They don't make those decisions anymore. I predict, for instance, to give you an example, Advanstar, which was one of the big US companies that we had in the pure US, that we have in the US, has been bought, as I mentioned earlier, by UBM. They have a magnificent, beautiful show called Magic. Some of those of you who are in the fashion industry certainly know about that show. For years, there was pressure on the CEO of the company, Joe Loggia. Why don't you take your show overseas? It will be instantly accepted. It's a big show. It's a very well recognized. People are asking for it. He was being pursued by interest in Brazil, in India itself, in China, to bring the show to their country. He steadfastly refused because he didn't have the team, the expertise, the knowledge, and the appetite for risk to take it out. And all of a sudden, UBM takes over. I suspect, and Mike, tell us if we're right or not, that in the next 6 months or so, we're going to start seeing some magic shows somewhere. It's he's answering. So it's just a way of accelerating the payback that they would have done, obviously, by paying big premium, close to $1 billion, for that company. $1 billion.
So are you saying the Americans are more laid back? And the
UK
UK guys are much smarter? I'm sorry, but are you saying the Americans are not smart enough?
I didn't use smart. You're the one who's using smart. Use smart. So I'm saying that the US have less motivation today of going out. And if they do, usually, it is through a subsidiary that is not in the US. Usually, they'll do it through their UK subsidiary, in cases of Penwell, which is your partner,
yep,
right? And other companies, they would do it through a country or an intermediary that has knowledge of the market they want to penetrate. How many of you have any relationship with a US company? 1, 2, 3, 4, of course. And how many of you have an interest with a European company? All right. See, it's almost 3, 4 times the number. It's just an indication of how the markets work. It doesn't mean that they have less interest. It doesn't mean that Mr. Modi came to the US, was very well received. The warming of the relationship is fantastic. I do suspect it will have some impact, but the dynamic of the political world are totally different than the dynamics of our world, the trade show world.
I would say, since we have David and we have from CISO, frankly speaking, if our fraternity from India is more interactive at IE and CISO, we would have probably a more opportunity to interact with the US organizers. I have had the experience at CISO and IE for several years now. And I think, I could be wrong, but I have worked with the association in the United States as well. But I think if we expose ourselves, and this is the time for us to expose there, if we go there and you kind of give us an opportunity to showcase India, it could be an interactive with the counterparts.
You know, it's a great point. I mean, first of all, by coming to the US, and there are a couple of forums that you should all know and maybe attend. One, and again, represented by the two gentlemen here. One is CISO, which is it's all the for-profit companies. It's where a lot of the deals are being made. Very powerful group, maybe 150 people, but top of their class, representing 40% and more of the association. They have a meeting twice a year, I'm sorry. And then you have the other association, which is across the board for the association and the for-profit, and that's really the IEE, the International Association of Exhibitions and Events. Now, the IEE has a forum in December where there is an exhibition, a little bit like yours, if you will. Different scale, of course, because the industry is a little bit different. And we've had pavilions throughout the years from different countries, from the suppliers and some of the organizers as well. For instance, Korea sent a dozen of their show organizers to try to deal and make contact with US organizers.
That's what I'm saying.
And some have been successful.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's a good part of suppliers here. And by the way, the #1 supplier in our industry in the US is an Indian company or an Indian origin person,
right.
You know, and it's A to Z. They're very successful. There's 3 or 4 other Indian companies that are very successful that serve the trade show industry. And playing on the strength that you have in software and analytics and so forth.
That was exactly my point, because I think we can definitely leverage through the forums from IE and CISO, right from the organizers to suppliers, because the matchmaking actually takes place. And I've been there, I think it's fantastic. I think.
Great.
Okay, I think we are limited for time, so.
I just want to ask actually my two colleagues here if they want to say a word to
Sure.
Mr. Schomer and Mr. Dubois, anything you want to add to what we said here?
Well, I think what we're going to do is discuss this in the next session, Sharif. So,
great.
You know, I think a lot of the answers and a lot of the questions will be discussed
Brilliant.
next. Yeah.
Okay, great. So stay tuned for the next session.
Okay, any questions from the audience for Sharif here? Because we're running out of time. His presentation, sorry, but yeah. Any questions?
I'm sure you have questions. Come on. Yes, sir.
Mike.
So, Michael Duck, UBM. Sharif, I think a lot of what you discussed here about the US companies is quite correct. One of the things is that the US market is in itself a fantastic market. It's very active, and at the moment it's growing and trending upwards very nicely. So for a lot of companies in the United States, why bother going outside is really what they're looking at. So how can the Indian industry or Indian government look at how to make India a much more attractive country in terms of where US investors can come to? Now, some, for instance, have been here a long time. Cisco Systems has their #2 office worldwide in Bangalore, employed some 6,000 people there or so. There are some marked interests, marked brands that do that. Mr. Modi's visit was a great catalyst, but there still needs to be a lot more to be able to say to American entrepreneurs, American private equity, come to India, because it's a place you can actually come and do business, and it's a place which is friendly to business. And that also, when we've discussed later on in the day about the exhibition industry, in terms of the professionalism of it, in terms of the large enough venues, etc. Those elements together will make the US position much more tenable for here. And also in terms of private equity into the market here. So not so much a question, but...
Great question. If I can take a shot at it. You're absolutely right. Let's look at it a little bit from an American point of view. When an American company decides to go out, you know, they usually look at either Asia or Europe. When they look at Europe, invariably at the beginning, they look at either Amsterdam or England because of the language. Surprising, but that's what it is. So we've analyzed this, and these are the two main destinations. If you look at Asia, up to 15 years ago, there was almost a no-brainer. 15, 20 years ago, you go to Singapore and maybe Hong Kong. And then obviously China started rising. So people are starting to see, you know, should we go to China? We don't know anything about China, you know. But more and more, their industry itself, especially the manufacturing industry, started going to China. So they had to follow where their exhibitors were going. So if you want to sell to this industry, you got to go to the Chinese show. Plastic industry is a good example, you know. Huge show in the United States, slowly lost its power. Toy industry, another industry. Obviously, the manufacturing is being done in China. Marketing is done in the US. So when they're ready to go outside, they're thinking, let's do something in China. You know, that's one area. But there are still, obviously, some jewels in the US as far as export is concerned, and I totally agree with you. The market's so vibrant that the question is always, where do I invest? Do I invest into another show, into my show, where the return can be very quickly realized, the profit margin is much bigger than anywhere outside the US, not just India, anywhere, including China? Or do I go and get the brand out, because ultimately it's going to help me support and grow my show in the United States? That is still a one-on-one decision made by the different board, the different companies, and so forth. The jewels are the IT companies. And India has a big advantage here. When Cisco, you mentioned Cisco, but take Oracle, take IBM, take you know, all those big companies, when they have a user meeting, they got to do it worldwide. When they have a tech show, they got to do it worldwide because their users are worldwide. And India becomes important, and Bangalore even more. And it helps that the Bangalore venue is very good. That helps a lot. Is there a signal for all of us?
Yeah, we're running. Just one last question. Anybody else?
Mr. Sharif, what is the ratio of B2B and B2C shows in USA?
I'm sorry, here, yeah, go ahead.
What is the ratio of B2B and B2C shows in USA, especially for this food sector, which we were talking yesterday, actually?
I'm sorry, I did not get
What is the ratio between the B2B and B2C shows in the US and specifically?
David, do you have any idea on that ratio? We're doing some research on that. The IEIA also represents the B2C shows as well. They have a NACS division or council. All right, so no more. We'll get to you. I don't have that answer. I don't know what is the ratio. But one thing is sure, the B2C cannot be exported, or very few can be exported. You know, the idea can. But since you're relying on local exhibitors and local visitors, it's not really the one that you want to go to America or even to Europe to find a brand for. You can inspire yourself and then do it. But it's really the B2B we're talking about, those 9,000 shows. Yes?
Well, I guess I've been given signals that we've run out of time. Thank you very much. I'm sure you will be...
Thank you very much. Okay.
Happy to... Thank you.
Well, US is a big market for India, and India is equally dynamic for US, so that talk was really important for all of us, and it was rather walk the talk. Mr. Sheriff, you've earned yourself a memento for this presentation. We'd like to present a memento to you. I request Mr. Rajan Sharma to do the honors. A memento on our behalf to Mr. Sheriff. Thank you. May I request Mr. M.B. Naqvi, Executive Committee Member of IEIA, to please come on stage and present a memento to Mr. Rajan Sharma, the moderator of this session.